I was already in my pajamas and about to throw back the covers of the bed to finally get comfortable and allow myself to forget myself for a while in a deep, peaceful sleep that I had been so lacking in recent weeks, when suddenly, out of nowhere, in the insistent silence of the bedroom, the phone lying on the nightstand next to the bed vibrated, making that short, trembling sound that always made me slightly uneasy, especially at such late hours. The screen glowed with a soft bluish light, and the caller ID unmistakably reflected the name of my younger sister, Sarah, the one who always seemed to me a mixture of chaos and inspiration, sometimes at the same time. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. I almost decided not to answer. It was almost 11 o'clock at night, and my body, exhausted by endless meetings, reports, and deadlines, demanded silence and rest, but, knowing my sister well and her unbending determination to achieve what she wanted, I understood, if I did not pick up the phone now, she would call until the battery died or until I gave in under this pressure. With a heavy sigh, I swiped my finger across the screen, connecting the call. "Hi, Paulina, my God, I'm so glad you answered." Sarah's voice was as loud as always, but today it vibrated with a special energy, some kind of excited, almost childish delight. "I have the most amazing news in the world." I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the fatigue rising up from my toes, and reluctantly answered, trying to keep my voice soft but controlled. "Sarah, it's really late, and I have to get up early tomorrow. Can we talk about this in the morning?" "No, no, no. You have to hear this right now," she interrupted me, and I could hear her breathing heavily, as if she had just run a marathon. "This will change everything for our whole family." She spoke so quickly that I could barely catch the gist of what was said, catching individual words like a fisherman trying to pull a net out of a stormy sea. "I've been working on a business idea for weeks now, and I've finally thought it all out. We're all going to be rich, Paulina, seriously, really rich." I instinctively rubbed my temples, trying to ease the nagging headache that seemed more and more tangible with every word she said. At 34, I had already learned to be extremely skeptical of any talk of sudden wealth, especially from family members, and especially from Sarah. "Sarah, please slow down, what exactly are you talking about?" Okay, she took a breath. "Everyone is complaining about how expensive everything is these days: food, clothes, household goods, everything has gone up in price. I have figured out a way to solve this problem and make a lot of money at the same time. This is wonderful, Paulina, just listen to me." I heard the floorboards creak, a characteristic old creak that invariably occurred in the same places in the apartment in which, by the way, I had allowed her and her husband to live rent-free for 3 years now because they temporarily could not afford to rent. The creak was a reminder. I had compromised too often, out of responsibility, out of pity, out of love. "I'm going to start a subscription service," she continued excitedly, "where people pay a small monthly fee and get discounted products delivered right to their door. But here's the genius part. I'm going to partner with local businesses to supply their products, support them, and everyone wins." I paused, the words hung in the air. In 10 years of working for a large international consulting firm, I'd seen and heard many such schemes, and most of them had failed miserably, unable to withstand the realities of the market, the logistical challenges, or the fierce competition from industry giants. "Sarah," I began carefully, "that sounds like existing subscription services, dozens of them, the market is oversaturated." "No," she exclaimed, "mine will be different. I will only work with local businesses. People are tired of corporations, they want to support their own. It's a trend, Paulina, you can see it." But I could already hear the faint sounds of failure in the silences between her words. Logistics, supplies, quality control, customers, complaints, returns. It was a quagmire from which startups rarely emerged alive. "Okay, but why are you calling me about this at 11 at night?" There was silence on the other end, a few seconds, just her breathing, slightly rapid, as if she was unsure whether to speak or not. "Well, the thing is, I need a little seed capital to get things moving." I knew, of course, it was all leading up to that. It was just a question of how much. "How much is a little?" I asked, bracing myself for anything. "Just $100,000. I almost choked, actually, I choked. I took a few shuddering breaths, trying to catch my breath, and squeezed out. "What did you just say?" $100,000. I know it may seem like a lot of money, but think of it as an investment. When the business starts making money, you get it all back, and with interest. I stood up and started walking around the room, trying to make my voice sound as calm as possible, so that there would be no irritation, fatigue, or distrust in it. "Sarah, what makes you think I should give you $100,000 for an idea that, frankly, has a 5% chance of success?" "Because you're rich." She flared up, and I immediately heard the sharpness, the causticity, almost the offense in her voice. "You have a house, an apartment, a good job. For you, 100,000 is nothing." It is true that I was financially secure, and there was no miracle, no luck, or generous outstretched hand in this, because every dollar lying in my accounts was the result of many years of work, sleepless nights, doubts, miscalculations, perseverance, and consistent, albeit sometimes risky, but thoughtful steps, and I was truly proud that I was able to achieve this stability, which, as I always believed, every woman strives for, who decided not to depend on anyone but herself. Saving, discipline in spending, reasonable investments, thoughtful purchase of real estate, as well as a complete absence of impulsive decisions, all this was the foundation of my financial well-being. But with all this, $100,000 did not seem like a trifle to me at all, and even more so I could not treat them with a frivolous readiness to invest in an obviously weak, barely glued together business idea, the failure of which I, with years of analysis and consultations behind me, could foresee with almost frightening clarity. "Sarah, listen to me," I said calmly, holding back my irritation, although inside I was already seething from the absurdity of the situation. I have been working in the field of business consulting and project development for over 10 years, and during this time I have seen hundreds of business plans, very different, from brilliant to crazy, from promising to doomed from the very beginning, and believe me, I can tell almost immediately how viable this or that idea is, and yours, no matter how dear it is to you, simply will not work. You and your husband will be happy if you hold out for 6 months before you run out not only of startup capital, but also of moral strength." There was a dead silence in the receiver, and I already understood that she was offended, although she had not yet said a word, and a few moments later a male voice cut through the background, dully and irritably inquiring about the reason for the excitement. She must have been in tears, judging by the heavy breathing and muffled sounds coming through the speaker. "You know what, Paulina?" Her voice suddenly went cold, like metal touching skin on a winter morning. "I thought you'd support me. I thought you'd want to help your family achieve something, and you just decided that you could judge and reject. Thank you." "I'm trying to help you, Sarah," I said quietly but firmly. "Keeping you from disaster is helping, too. Want to learn business? Start small, use your own money, or, if mom and dad support your dream, let them help you." "Okay, whatever," she said sharply, and there was no hope or resentment in those words anymore, only resentment, thick and prickly, like fog over a swamp. "I think I was wrong about you," and then she just hung up. No goodbye, no talk later, just silence, empty, ringing, heavy. I stared at the phone for a minute, motionless, as if frozen, waiting for her to change her mind and call again, to apologize, to explain, but of course she didn't. It was Sarah, she always left with a slammed door. I shook my head, feeling the fatigue I had wanted to leave behind at the threshold of this night settle on my shoulders with renewed vigor. I plugged my phone into the charger and finally got into bed, trying to convince myself that everything would probably settle down. In a day or two Sarah would calm down, and everything would return to normal, as it had happened many times before when her dreams were crushed by reality. Perhaps she would even thank me, not right away, maybe in a month, maybe in a year, for keeping her from making a mistake. The next morning I woke up in a good mood, almost forgetting about the conversation yesterday, allowed myself the luxury of lazy coffee made in my favorite French press, opened my laptop and began to sort through my emails, not expecting that the day would suddenly turn in a completely different direction. When the phone rang, my mother's name appeared on the screen, and this immediately alerted me, because she almost never called before noon, especially without a message. I picked up the phone, not yet suspecting that a real performance was about to begin. "Hi, Mom, how are you?" I asked calmly, almost absent-mindedly. "Paulina, I need to talk to you right now." Her voice was the same, stern and cold, the one she used as a child. When she caught me lying or being lazy, my heart sank, and I straightened up. What's the matter? The problem is that your sister called me yesterday in tears, she began without preamble, because you refused to help her with some small request. A small request? I almost spat out my coffee, putting down my cup. Mom, she asked me for $100,000, that's not a trifle, even for me. For someone in your position, 100,000 is nothing. You have 2 properties, a good job. Sarah is just trying to become a better person, build her own business, support her family, and you. I can't believe I'm hearing this from you, I interrupted. Mom, do you even understand what the essence of her business is? It's a subscription service in an already overheated market, and the statistics of such projects failing are simply depressing. I would literally throw money away. What if it doesn't work out? Mom asked, and I heard growing irritation in her voice. Exactly, I answered, what if it doesn't work out? At least she will gain valuable experience, isn't that worth supporting her? I felt weakness run through my legs, and I had to sit down, because it didn't fit in my head that my mother seriously thought that $100,000 could be spent on experience. Are you serious? Are you really asking me to give her $100,000 so she can learn from her mistakes? I'm asking you to be a support for your family, not a selfish person clinging to your money, she said harshly. Selfish? I was starting to boil. Mom, I work 60 hours a week to earn this money. I don't find it on the street, and if Sarah wants to gain entrepreneurial experience, let her start with her own money, or yours, Dad's. There was a long pause, almost ominous. You know what your problem is, Paulina, she said slowly, you don't understand what family is. Family is support, help, sacrifice, and you keep counting and counting. I sat there, stunned, at a loss for words. Me, who let Sarah and her husband live in my apartment for free for 3 years. Me, who paid for Mom's medicine and Dad's tests. I, who arranged Sarah's wedding and paid for the whole family's vacation. And now they call me selfish because I don't want to just give away $100,000 for an unformed dream. Mom, I've been helping our family for many years. If Sarah really wants to start a business, she needs to approach it seriously, draw up a clear business plan, conduct market research, prepare a financial model, and not just say, give me money and believe me, everything will work out. I can't believe how cold you've become, Paulina. Your father and I raised you better. These words, spoken with grim confidence, sounded like a death sentence, as if I had violated some unspoken family code, forgotten by me in the race for independence and autonomy. But I was not going to give in without words. I was not going to allow my actions and motives to be so easily distorted. You raised me to work hard and be responsible with money, I said slowly, almost in a whisper, holding back the tremor of betrayal in my voice. That's exactly what I'm doing. I won't let myself be used as an ATM just because I've succeeded. We'll see. My mother's voice turned icy, as if she had already made a point. Maybe someday you'll understand what you've lost by turning away from your family. And then, almost mirroring Sarah's behavior, she simply hung up. No hint of regret, no attempt to soften the conversation. The line went dead, and the room fell silent, resonating with the emptiness inside. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the black screen of the phone as if it were a mirror, showing me not my reflection, but something alien, unfamiliar, a world in which logic and fairness had lost all power. It all resembled some kind of distorted reality, in which any argument I made turned into accusations, and reasonable caution was perceived as betrayal. Over the next few weeks, against my better judgment, I still hoped that Sarah would cool down and call as usual. Usually she called me at least twice a week, sometimes for no reason, just to complain about traffic, her husband, bad coffee, her life. Now, nothing, complete silence. I didn't call her myself. The aftertaste of our last conversation was too bitter, but I checked my phone every day, caught myself staring at the list of missed calls for a long time, hoping to see her name. The weeks gave way to new work cycles, changing seasons, and intense projects. I got into a routine, immersed myself in work like in a protective cocoon. Without family dramas, it became quieter and easier. But when autumn gave way to winter, that subtle scent that always reminds me of Christmas appeared in the air, a mix of cinnamon, pine needles, and something cozy, homey, invisible. I started preparing for the holiday in advance, as always, with the same attention to detail that I always put into choosing gifts. For my mother, I chose a soft, warm cashmere scarf in a pastel lavender shade, which I thought would suit her perfectly. For Dad, a bottle of aged single malt Scotch whiskey, which he loved to sip on winter evenings. For Sarah and Massimo, I bought a set of kitchen gadgets, stylish, multifunctional, the kind she had mentioned in passing in one of our previous conversations. I always tried to choose gifts with soul, sincerity, regardless of what I received in return, be it cheap candles from the supermarket or banal cards without a signature. 3 months had passed since the day the quarrel broke out, and I, naively believing that everything would be settled by Christmas, that the festive mood would melt the ice, as had happened before, threw myself headlong into preparations. In our family, there were never any long-term grudges during the holidays. That's just how it happened. We could argue, raise our voices, close doors louder than necessary, but by Christmas we always made up, so I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary when my mother called me again a week before the holiday. "Paulina, I need to tell you something about Christmas," she said without preamble, with the same sharp, business-like manner with which she sometimes announced doctor's appointments or important changes in plans. "Oh, good," I replied, genuinely glad that she was in touch again. "I was wondering what time you wanted me to come. I've already prepared all the presents." "Exactly," she said heavily, and for a moment there was a pause on the line. "You're not invited this year." It was as if someone had hit me in the solar plexus. I almost dropped the phone. "What do you mean, not invited?" "Sarah doesn't want you there. She says she can't stand the sight of you after what you did to her. She demanded that we not invite you." And my father and I agreed. I didn't even immediately find what to answer. Are you kidding? Are you choosing Sarah over me?" "We don't choose anyone. It was you who decided to hurt your sister when she needed your support. This is just a consequence of your actions. When you spend Christmas alone, maybe you will finally understand what family means." The connection was cut off, and I was left sitting, holding the now silent phone to my ear, unable to believe that this was really happening. I, Paulina, the one who always supported everyone, helped, pulled, covered debts and turned a blind eye to mistakes, was simply erased from the family circle for the sake of the offended pride of my younger sister, and all because I did not give $100,000 to her dubious startup. I immediately dialed Sarah's number. The ringing tone was voicemail. I called again, the same result. I left 3 messages, choosing my words carefully, trying to sound calm and convincing, but in response, silence. Then I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to my own apartment, where she and Massimo still lived. I needed to look her in the eyes, to talk, to find out what the hell was going on. I knocked on the door. "Sarah, it's me, we need to talk." "Go away, Paulina, I don't want to see you." "Sarah, please, just open the door, let's talk about it." "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice when you refused to help me. I don't consider you my sister anymore." I stood there, shocked, not believing my ears. "Sarah, you're ridiculous, open the door." "No, leave me alone and don't come back." I stood there for another 10 minutes, knocking, coaxing, pleading, to no avail. She was relentless. Finally, I gave in and drove home, feeling dizzy with disbelief, hurt, and anger. When I got back, I poured myself a large glass of wine and sat in the living room, trying to process what had happened. The expensive Christmas presents, carefully wrapped and stacked under the tree, now seemed like a mockery, a farce. A cashmere scarf for my mother, who had just excluded me from a family holiday. Kitchen utensils for Sarah, who hadn't answered the door. I thought about the 3 years I'd let her and Massimo live in my apartment. It had cost at least $2,000 a month, if not more. That meant I'd already sunk more than $70,000 into their rent alone, and then, over the years, many other things happened that I might have once considered just natural expressions of love and care, without expecting anything in return, as it should be in a real family. But now, revisiting every detail, I began to realize how long I had been taken for granted, as if my resources were endless and my patience inexhaustible. I paid for Sarah's entire wedding because she and Massimo were broke, as always, with a lot of ideas and zero in the bank account, and I didn't even think then how much it would cost me, not only financially, but also emotionally, because each of the guests, raising a glass to the newlyweds, had no idea that I was the one behind this whole fairy tale. 2 years ago, I arranged a vacation for the whole family to Hawaii, fully paid for tickets, accommodation, food and excursions, simply because I wanted us to be together and, perhaps, feel a little happier. I covered my mother's medical bills when she needed expensive dental work because my father's pension barely covered the utilities and her pain had become a constant background. I helped my father when his car broke down and he couldn't afford the repairs because he needed to go to the hospital, and taking the bus with his bad back was impossible. And this is how they repaid me. They conspired and crossed me out of the family, as if I were a stranger, uninvited, unwanted, simply because I did not agree to become an investor in Sarah's next soap bubble, her next dream of easy money and recognition. The more I thought about it, the more rage displaced the pain, and I was no longer just bitter, I was truly furious, from the injustice with which they treated me. As if I were a nobody, a nothing, just a tool, an ATM with a face, a voice and a heart. How dare they treat me like this after all I've done? How dare Sarah play the victim when for years her life had been entirely supported by my generosity, my labor, my goodwill? I finished my wine, set the glass down with a thud, and felt a decision welling up inside me, clear, simple, and final. If they wanted to cut me out of the family, so be it, but I, for my part, was no longer going to play the role of the meek benefactor, to be used and despised. I wasn't their bank, I was a human being, and from that moment on, my attitude changed. The next morning, I went to the mall to buy Christmas presents. The salespeople looked at me with surprise and mild confusion as I lugged bag after bag to the returns desk. Cashmere, alcohol, electronics, all of which I had so carefully selected were now unnecessary baggage that I wanted to get rid of. I didn't care how they looked at me. I had gotten almost $800 back. Money I had decided to keep rather than spend on those who took my care for granted. Then I started planning. An idea had formed in my head, and the more I thought about it, the more details emerged. I just had to wait until Christmas to put it into action. The main thing was to make sure that Sarah and Massimo weren't in the apartment. I knew they would probably spend the entire day at their parents' house. One glance at Sarah's social media profile would tell me that everything was business as usual. I turned off my phone for a few days, not because I expected a call, but because I didn't want to risk any kind of vulnerability. No accusations, no fake concern, of course, no one ever called, no messages, no hints. Their silence was deafening. Finally, Christmas Eve arrived. I spent it alone, ordering Chinese takeout and idly binge-watching Netflix. It was unusually quiet, strange, even no conversations, no bustle, no last-minute preparations for a family dinner, no overlapping voices, no smell of turkey and cinnamon. But this silence had its own charm, a calm that I had long lacked. There was no need to pretend that everything was fine, to smile through resentment, to catch condescending glances. This was honest loneliness. On Christmas morning, I slept until 10. When I woke up, I made myself breakfast, an omelette with greens, toast with butter, strong coffee. Then, out of habit, I looked at social networks. As I expected, Sarah had already posted photos from the holiday at her parents', with a Christmas tree, gifts, smiles. The timestamp showed that the pictures were taken just half an hour ago, and the caption to them, "Oh, it was like a blow." Spending Christmas morning with the people who really matter. Sometimes you need to cut toxic people out of your life to make room for happiness. Toxic. I was toxic. Because I hadn't funded her ridiculous, doomed idea. The audacity of it knocked the wind out of my lungs. But for all its rudeness, Sarah's post gave me exactly what I needed to know. She and Massimo were definitely at my parents' house, which meant my apartment, the one they'd claimed for 3 years, was empty. I grabbed my keys, put on my coat, and drove off. I still had a spare key, because even though they were temporarily staying, the apartment was still my property, legally and factually. I walked inside and immediately noticed the smell, a mix of dust, unwashed dishes, and unwashed clothes. The sink was piled high, the floor was littered with clothes, and the carpet looked like it hadn't been vacuumed in months. My heart sank, not in pain, but in determination. I walked through the rooms, wasting no time, starting with the bedroom. Clothes, books, cosmetics, electronic devices. I carefully but firmly packed everything that belonged to Sarah and Massimo. It took me almost 2 hours to collect everything. Then I called the storage facility I had my eye on. Fortunately, they were open even on Christmas. Probably not the first time they helped people in such family emergencies. I signed up for the lease, loaded everything into the car and made 3 trips there and back. With each box, I felt a blaze of not revenge, no. Liberation. It was not an act of rage, it was an act of purification. On the last lap, I called the locksmith, the same one I had agreed with in advance. Just in case, he agreed to come on Christmas for double the price, which was fine with me. By the time I returned with the last batch of things, he was already waiting at the entrance. He worked quickly, professionally, silently, and I stood by and watched the last traces of the past disappear, the old locks, the familiar handles. Replacing both locks, bolts, and handles took about 40 minutes. He handed me a set of new keys, wished me a Merry Christmas and drove away, leaving me at a door that now opened only for me. I stood in the apartment for a few minutes, simply breathing in the air that no longer carried the heavy, oppressive mix of unwashed dishes, expired food, unpacked things, and the echoes of someone else's disrespectful life, and enjoyed the silence and cleanliness that came with all that junk, physical and emotional, vanishing from my space as if it had never been there. Then I closed the door behind me, turned the new key in the lock twice, and went home to enjoy Christmas Eve in peace, taste, and dignity, this time not for someone else, not out of obligation, but purely for myself. I ordered dinner at my favorite restaurant, a cozy, trendy Italian place that, to my delight, offered delivery even on holidays, and allowed myself to open a bottle of champagne that I had once saved for a special occasion, long since forgetting what exactly I had meant by that vague formulation. I put on a good playlist filled with jazz, light classical and soft vocals, called a few friends to wish them a Merry Christmas, and the conversations with them turned out to be surprisingly warm, sincere, kind, because these were people who really cared about me, without demanding anything, without expecting an investment, without measuring my worth by the size of my bank account. Sitting in the living room, surrounded by the soft light of garlands and the warmth of champagne, enjoying aromatic pasta with truffle oil and mushrooms, I suddenly realized that this was the best Christmas in many years. No drama, no forced smiles and strained thank yous, no hysterics, manipulation, persuasion, and disappointment, only peace, silence, clarity of thought, and a light but firm sense of inner dignity because I finally stood up for myself. I watched a couple of good movies, video called my college roommate who now lived in California, and went to bed amid laughter, stories, and fond memories. Feeling like I truly belonged to myself for the first time in a long time, I woke up late that morning. Without an alarm, made myself some cinnamon coffee, and slowly, happily began doing what I had been putting off for a long time, sorting through my things, reorganizing my closets, making myself cozy. It was almost noon when the phone rang. I glanced at the screen and felt everything inside me freeze. First Sarah, then Massimo, then Mom, then Dad. The calls came one after another, as if on cue. I knew exactly what they found. Empty rooms, new locks, their things carefully carted off to storage. No access, and no one's will but mine. I smiled, not out of anger, no, but rather out of inner calm and determination, and without a moment's hesitation, I turned off the sound. Let them sort it out, let them finally face the consequences of their actions, let them feel what it's like to be ignored, what it's like to be left behind the door they themselves once slammed shut. The calls continued for about 2 hours. I didn't answer, and as the number of missed calls grew, I felt the panic, confusion, and then anger growing in those digital signals. I turned on voicemail, and it all confirmed, first cautious, conciliatory phrases, then increasing insistence, and finally outbursts of rage, incoherent reproaches, accusations of cruelty and betrayal. Somewhere closer to 2 o'clock in the morning there was a knock on the door. I looked out the window, already knowing who I would see, and I was right. The 4 of them were standing on the porch, like a scene from a bad play. Mom was clutching her purse so tightly that her knuckles were white. Dad stood with his arms crossed over his chest and a furrowed brow. Sarah looked like she was about to lose it, scream, throw something at my window. And Massimo, standing a little behind, looked confused, depressed, like everything that was happening had long since gone beyond what he could handle. I took a deep breath, opened the door and, without saying anything, stepped back so they could come in, which they did, without waiting for an invitation as always, as if they were allowed to do anything, as if boundaries and other people's property did not matter to them. "What the hell did you do?" Sarah screamed, her face purple with anger. "The locks were changed? You can't just throw us out." "Actually, I can," I answered evenly, without raising my voice, "It's my apartment, my property, my name is on the deeds, I can do with it whatever I want." Mom stepped forward, her eyes shining with tears. "Paulina, dear, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We didn't mean to offend you when we didn't invite you to Christmas. We just wanted Sarah to have time to cool off, to think." Misunderstanding? I looked at her with cold surprise. "You said that I was toxic, that I would understand what family was when I spent Christmas alone." That didn't sound like a misunderstanding, it was said quite clearly. Dad, who had been silent until then, finally intervened. "Look, maybe we all said more than we should have, maybe we didn't mean it, but throwing my sister out on the street, that's too much. Where are they going to live now?" "That's not my problem anymore," I answered, looking into my father's eyes. "Last week, you all made it very clear that I am no longer part of this family, so why should strangers live in my apartment?" Sarah threw her hair back in fury and stepped closer, her lips trembling. "Strangers? We are not strangers, we are your family, psycho." "No, we are not family," I spoke calmly, with icy clarity. "Family doesn't cut each other out of their lives because of money. Family doesn't call you toxic for refusing to invest in a project that's sure to fail. Family, if it's family, won't turn its back on you when you're just trying to do the right thing." Massimo, who had been standing there silently, finally spoke, his voice soft, almost pleading. "Paulina, we'd been living there for 3 years, we can't just find a new place overnight, can't we just work this out?" "You should have thought of that earlier," I said, "before you decided to punish me for not agreeing to throw away $100,000 for someone else's half-baked dream." Sarah exploded again, and in her voice, trembling with anger, there was no longer a shred of pretense, no hint of gratitude or remorse, only wounded pride mixed with childish capriciousness. "There's no guarantee it'll fail." "You don't know everything," she screamed, throwing up her hands as if to push away the obvious. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculously predictable. "Sarah," I said wearily, but without shaking, "you've never been in business in your life, you've never held a job for more than 2 years, you have no business plan, no market research, no financial projections, not the slightest idea of how subscription services actually work, and yet you expect me to just go and give you $100,000 because you have, intuition?" I spread my hands and added, "You say I have to support my family, and I have been supporting them, for many years now." I felt the anger that had long been suppressed rise up inside me with renewed vigor. "I let you live in my apartment for 3 years. Do you realize how much that costs? Over $70,000 in rent alone. I paid for your entire wedding, I took us all to Hawaii, I paid for Mom's treatment and Dad's car repairs, and God knows how much more, I'm not counting anymore. And in response, you boycotted me, cut me out of the family because I didn't want to invest another $100,000 in your fantastic business." "It's not fantastic," Sarah screamed, but her voice was already starting to break. It's, she choked with emotion. "And you know what all this proves? That you can't think ahead. You decided to get revenge on me by not letting me in for Christmas, but you didn't think that I could lose my apartment in return. That's exactly why you won't succeed in business, you don't calculate the consequences of your actions." I looked at her, seeing her lips trembling with impotent anger, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, and for a moment I felt sorry for her, but that feeling quickly disappeared. "Where are our things?" Massimo asked quietly, looking at me with weariness. I went to the table, took a piece of paper and calmly wrote down the address of the storage room and the cell number, then handed it to him. "It's all there, I paid for a month's storage, the rest is up to you." "You can't do this to us," Sarah was now sobbing through her tears. "We're used to living there, we don't have money for rent." "Then maybe you should get a job," I answered coldly, "and start living like adults, instead of living off your sister, whom you despise when she tells you the truth." Papa stepped forward, his voice harsh. "Paulina, this has gone too far, you're being cruel." "Cruel?" I raised my eyebrows. "I'm the cruel one? Me, who supported you all financially for years, who worked my ass off to make sure everyone had everything. And you excluded me from Christmas, called me toxic, and now I'm the cruel one?" A tense silence fell over the room. Mom was still crying quietly, pressing a handkerchief to her eyes. Sarah was wiping her nose with her sleeve, and only Dad looked embarrassed, as if he was only just beginning to realize how this all looked from the outside. Listen, Mom began, her voice weak and trembling, maybe we could all sit down and talk calmly, like adults, figure out how to solve this. No, I said firmly, there's nothing to solve, you all made your choice when you decided that I was no longer part of this family, and now I'm making mine, I'm done with you. That's not what you meant, Dad began, but I interrupted him. I'm dead serious, from now on, I don't want to have anything to do with you, no calls, no messages, no visits, I'm cutting off all communication and cutting off all financial support, you're on your own now, Paulina, please, Mom begged, clutching at the air, forgive us, we were wrong. Yes, I answered, you were wrong, and now you will live with the consequences. I went to the door, opened it and took a step to the side, now, please, leave my house, and don't come back again. They froze for a moment, stunned, then Dad, taking Mom's hand, slowly walked towards the exit. Massimo followed them, his shoulders slumped. Without saying a word, Sarah stopped right in front of me. I hate you, she whispered with such malice that for a moment I felt uneasy. Okay, I answered, not looking away, there are two of us now. When the door closed behind them, I turned the key in the lock, leaned my back against the wood and stood there for a long time, feeling both emotional exhaustion and incredible relief. That's it, finally, it was over. Over the next few weeks, they continued to try to get in touch, phone calls, text messages, emails, even a few visits to my house, to which I simply ignored. Mom was tearful and accusatory, Dad tried to be reasonable, Sarah vacillated between apologies and threats, and Massimo was, oddly enough, predictable. He complained that the rent was too expensive for them. Eventually, they gave in. From mutual friends and relatives, I learned that Sarah and Massimo had found a small apartment on the other side of town and were struggling to make ends meet. Mom and Dad, apparently, wasted no time telling anyone who would listen about my selfishness, coldness, and callousness, keeping quiet, of course, about the fact that they were the ones who excluded me from participating in the Christmas celebrations simply because I did not agree to issue a business loan. Meanwhile, I rented out my apartment to a nice young couple who not only pay their rent on time, but also take care of the place as if it were their own home. The rental income is stable, there are no worries, and for the first time in a long time, my life has found peace, quiet, and predictability. Do I miss my family? Sometimes, there are times when I want to call, hear their voice, talk about nothing. But then I remember how they treated me, and this feeling quickly goes away. Maybe we will make up someday, but not now, the wounds are still too fresh, and I am not ready to forgive yet. Now I am absolutely happy living without their constant demands, reproaches, and drama, and if someone considers this selfishness, so be it, but I call it self-preservation. Write a comment on what you think about this story and do not forget to subscribe to the channel and put a like. See you soon.